Thank you, Eric and team. So much appreciate your leading us before the Lord this morning. Would you take your Bibles, please, and turn to Luke chapter 12. If you're relatively new with us, or maybe it's your first time here this morning, I want you to especially feel welcomed. I trust that up to this point, you've sensed that, wow, this group, their focus is on Christ. And if that's what you're catching, that you're catching the right message. In Luke chapter 12, where we are turning to this morning, the Bible that is right in front of you, in the pew rack in front of you, if you're new with us, you don't have a Bible, take this with you. We want it to be yours as a gift, and the page numbers on the screen there will help you identify the passage for this morning. I have engaged in a check-in process. That's what it's called, a check-in process that is not original with me, but it's been very helpful, and I want to share with you because it applies to what we're doing this morning. The check-in is simply a question to help us be self-aware of where we are at the time. And I use this personally, in the morning, boy, I check in. Sometimes at dinner with Pamela, we'll check in with each other. And even in some meetings, I've used it one-on-one. Perhaps some of you have been aware of when I've done this. Here's the question. Here's the check-in question. Are you sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, or tender? You can remember SASHAY. That'll kind of help you as an acronym there. Are you sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender? Now, do your own check-in right now, okay? Do your own check-in. What are you? You can't insert your own words. My word isn't on that list. No, you can't do that. Can't do that. The other thing you cannot do is, I don't know if this is especially guys, but here's something that I'll do. Well, I'm a little angry. To say you're a little something, can't. You're angry. I'm angry. Yep, okay, I'm angry. So you can't be a little something. And you can be a combination of those. So just do your own check-in here for a moment. Now, there is a terrorist villain that has entered the world story recently, and that is ISIS. And if you've been paying attention to the news and what ISIS has been doing, as a terrorist villain in our world, some of the responses, if you were to check in, you would say, wow, that group, that makes me sad, makes me angry, or it makes me scared. Sad by the beheadings, angry at the atrocities that they're committing, and there would be even some who would be scared. So this shows how we're affected. But this morning, it's not about the terrorist villain ISIS that's entered our world story. It's what we're looking at is the terrorist villain that has entered into our own story, that has invaded. And there is a terrorist villain that we're looking at this morning. I want to identify that villain because for each of us, if we become subject to that villain, we're going to be sad, we're going to be angry, and we're going to be scared. Now, there's nothing wrong with being sad, nothing wrong with being angry, nothing wrong with being scared. But those aren't the conditions we want to choose to be in all the time, are they? Especially when it's self-inflicted. So here's the goal this morning, and that is to identify this villain, to determine what we will do to degrade and ultimately destroy this villain, this terrorist villain that has invaded our story. As a nation, we've heard this past week that the goal is to degrade and destroy the terrorist villain of ISIS. Well, how about the terrorist villain that has entered our story? That's what we're seeking to do this morning. Identify, degrade, destroy. We're in Luke chapter 12, and I'm going to begin reading at verse 13. Would you stand with me, please, as we look into God's word for some answers this morning? Luke 12:13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns, build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." You be seated, please. You know, whenever Jesus was in a crowd, it was not unusual for individuals in that crowd to seek FaceTime with him. And so here's this one guy in the crowd that comes up to Jesus. And, you know, if you close your eyes and put yourself in the scene and picture it, this isn't pictured for us, but if we picture it, we can, with the tone of this guy that has approached Jesus, we can pretty much see that his stride approaching Jesus is one of determination, and the stress on his face is one of irritation. If Jesus would have said to this guy, "Hey, check in," this guy would have checked in angry, no doubt about it. Now, we can assume here that this particular man that approached Jesus, we can assume that his parents have recently passed away. We can assume that at least there's two siblings, his brother and himself. And obviously, they are having a dispute over their inheritance. There are some things about this story that are not unusual at all. Number one, it's not unusual for siblings to have a dispute over inheritance. Happened all the time then, happens now. It was also not unusual that a person would approach a rabbi for some counsel. That was typical. But here's what we need to note from this passage. One of the things we need to note. And that is, when this man approached Jesus, he approached Jesus not for counsel, but he approached Jesus to tell Jesus what to do. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance. You know, I just need to pause there for a moment, because I think, boy, you know, that's a lot of times how I approach Jesus. I'm not seeking his counsel. I'm telling him what to do, especially when there's a bit of conflict going on in my life, you know. Let's say that Pamela and I don't agree with each other on something, and it's not, here's, in the past, I've learned now not to do this, but in the past, here's been my approach. I go to Jesus afterwards, I say, "Jesus, would you tell her that I'm right? You know, tell her. Hey, come on, you do the same thing. We all do, don't we?" And that's what this guy is doing. Tell my brother. And Jesus does not take kindly to that. He says to the guy, "Man," or in other words, hey, pal, I'm not going to be the arbiter in this situation." And Jesus wasn't about to place himself in that particular family squabble. However, Jesus did identify the core issue here. In verse 15, he tells this gentleman, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed." Watch out. Jesus remained neutral. Notice he's not saying whether the guy that came to him is greedy or his brother's greedy. Jesus didn't get into that. But Jesus did say, here's the issue. Here is the villain. The villain is greed. The villain is not your brother. The villain is greed. And as Jesus made this observation, it's obvious that he's making it in the context of conflict. Greed brings conflict in our relationships all the time. And certainly that's the case here. And when that happens, would you take note that when there's conflict in our relationships, if we're going to check in, are we going to check in happy? No. Are we going to check in excited? No. We're going to check in sad, angry, or scared. So right away, here's something that's invaded my life, this greed, this conflict that is not doing me any good and isn't doing anybody else any good either. And it can come in the context of family, like in this situation, or maybe it's not among siblings, but husbands and wives can easily get into conflict and discussions over generosity or greed. Which one are they going to be? Students, you can be bothered and in conflict with your parents because they're not buying you something that you think they should buy you. And you think they're being kind of greedy about it. And guess what? They think you're being kind of greedy. Greed brings conflict in our families. It also brings conflict in our business relationships. Many of you have customers or clients that it's like they want you to give away the store for them. Or perhaps you've had a partner in business who cheated you. That's what greed does. Greed also brings conflict in our friendships. How does this happen? We all wonder how this happens. How does this happen? You have a group together for, let's say, a lunch at a restaurant, and you divide up the check afterwards, and you're the one. Don't we all hate being the one to gather the money because we know what's going to happen, right? Somebody in the group is not anteing up. You never come out with more than enough money. Once in a while I've had that happen, but it's usually, boy, we're short here. You look around the table, causes conflict. Sometimes people will give their time. They'll give their time or talent. And they'll do a favor for you that you didn't even ask them to do, but then it's like from that point on, it's sort of held over you, isn't it? Like until you do something in return. That's what greed does. Greed can even cause conflict in our relationship with God. If you weren't here last week, the message last week was on generosity. And my guess is that there are some who could feel a bit unsettled during this past week because what we were looking at is the fact that if we are true followers of Jesus, our life will be lived graciously, generously, because that's how his life is lived towards us. How can that not be lived out through us? But not everybody likes that idea. Boy, just how generous am I expected to be? There's a question. Well, right away, we have a problem there. Some conflict with God. So greed brings all sorts of conflict. And that's pointed out right away in this passage. But then there's a second insight that Jesus brings to the forefront. It's in verse 15. Jesus said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." What we're told here is that greed comes in many forms. And that's what we really need to be watch out for, because it's insidious in its many forms. It's not just a matter of being greedy with our possessions. Some people are greedy with their time. They don't mind at all throwing a few bucks towards a certain need, but boy, don't ask me for a few minutes of my time. Oh no, don't go there. Some are greedy with their talents. Now let me flip that and give a positive example. I can think of times when people have come within the church here, or just as friends, they've come and they've said, I'm able to do this, whatever, fill in the blank. I'm able to do this. And if that would help you in any way, I'd be glad to do that for you. Now, that's the opposite of greed. That's the generosity with our talents. But sometimes people will hold back. They don't even let you know what they do because they don't want you asking for anything. We can be greedy with our time. We can be greedy with our talent. It takes many forms. And obviously, certainly, we can be greedy with our treasures. And when we're greedy with our treasure, with our possession, that too can take different forms. It can take the form of possessiveness, but also covetousness. And here's how those two play together. Possessiveness relates to what we have. Covetousness relates to what I don't have, what I want. Possessiveness is being selfish with what we own. Whereas covetousness is being preoccupied with what I don't own. Possessiveness doesn't want to part with what we have. Close-fisted. Whereas covetousness doesn't want to part with the dream of what we want to have. For example, covetousness would say, if I give in this certain way, then I'm not going to be able to get this other thing I want. I'm not going to be able to have that vacation. Jesus said, be careful. This greed takes many forms. It's an insidious villain that creeps into our lives unaware. And it blurs our discernment between our needs and our wants. Greed makes it seem like everything is a need. I need to have this. And Jesus said, watch out. And there's a further lesson that Jesus gives regarding greed. I begin to identify, when I get down to verse 20, Jesus tells this parable about this rich guy that really does well, wonders where to store all of his surplus. And in verse 20, Jesus said, you fool. Whoa. I think you'd probably agree with me. I don't ever want to do something that puts me in a position where God has reason to turn to me and say, you fool. I don't want to be in that position. So this is pretty serious, this story, this parable that Jesus tells. Serious situation going on here. Now, let's rule out some things. He's not saying that this guy's a fool because he has been successful in business. That's not it. There's nothing wrong with being able to have a profitable business. Jesus did not call this guy a fool because of some sin he had committed. There's no indication of that. There's every indication that this guy's made an honest living and that the success he's had as a businessman has come by practices of integrity. We're not led otherwise to think anything differently here. Here's what the account identifies. It identifies that this man is categorized as a fool because he failed to recognize the source of his wealth and pointed to his own hard work as that which brought the success, and it hadn't. Look at verses 17 and 18. This guy thought to himself, this guy in the story that Jesus was telling, he said, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. Look at all the personal pronouns here. And I will say to myself, you've done, you have plenty of grain, and you have it for many years now. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Take note that God was conspicuously absent from this guy's business plan. And you'd think, now this was a successful farmer in this story. You'd think that a farmer of all people would have known the need to write in God as part of his business plan, because who's the one that's bringing the rain and the sun? Who's the one that actually causes that harvest to grow? But no, God was just totally written out of the story. The lesson to be learned here from this warning to this fool is that greed gives us a false sense of well-being. That's the warning to us. And in this case, the farmer, this rich man, was a fool because he failed to recognize that God is the source of everything. He didn't. Without God, this guy would have had nothing. Not to mention, here's another reason he was a fool. Here's another reason he had a false sense of well-being, and that is he was not recognizing the brevity of life. I'm going to store all this up, and I'm just going to be able to live it up, eat, drink, and be merry. And Jesus said in this story, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. So greed, as a terrorist villain, comes into our life. It causes conflict. It's insidious. It comes in many different forms by which we can be unaware. And we also see here that it brings to us a false sense of well-being. Now, with that in mind, look at verse 21. Wrapping up the story, Jesus said, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. You can see Jesus, as he told this parable, zeroing in on the guy that came to him with the instruction about inheritance. You can see Jesus zeroing in with this story, but then as he concludes the story and comes to verse 21, pulls back and scans the crowd and says, this is how it will be for anyone. This is not just a story about one rich guy. This is how it will be for anyone that is not rich towards God. This term, not rich towards God, there's a lot of ways in which we could approach our understanding of it, but let's not complicate it. To me, it's pretty serious what Jesus is saying here. First of all, he's classified the guy as a fool, and then he said he's not rich towards God. He's poverty-stricken when it comes to God. It tells me that this thing of greed is very serious in God's eyes, and that is confirmed by Scripture itself, by the Apostle Paul when he wrote to the church at Colossae. And this is what he said. Put to death whatever belongs to your earthly nature. And then he lists some things. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed. There it is. Which is idolatry. Underline that. To be greedy is to be an idolater. To be greedy is to be in violation of the first and foundational commandment given by God when God said, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. There are many ways in which, whatever generation you're part of this morning, there are many ways in which the generations represented in this room are different from previous generations. Many ways. We all know that. Here's one way that we're different that we may not have thought of. And that is we don't have enough closet space. And get this, we have walk-in closets. Generations before us did not have walk-in closets. We do. And we get crowded out of our own walk-in closets. To me, that's a picture of what happens in our soul. The greed, when it takes that form of possessiveness and covetousness, it crowds God out. Our clinging to what we have, our possessiveness, and our craving for what we don't have, our covetousness, results in crowding out God. Story of the rich farmer here. Classic example. Totally crowded God out of his business plan. And Jesus said, this is how, verse 21, this is how it will be for whoever, any of us, stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. In other words, what happened to that foolish, rich farmer could happen to any of us. Any of us. Because this villain has come to town. Satan. The champion of greed. The very champion of greed. Because Satan fell as an angel because he was greedy for the glory that was going to God. Satan fell. And in that process becomes the enemy of our souls. And in that uses the same strategy of greed to thwart us, to enslave us, to destroy us. And anyone who becomes subject to that is either sad, angry, or scared, or all three. That's what happens when we fail to let God write our story. God wants to write a story through our lives that duplicates, that reproduces, that shows others, that extends to others the life of Christ. We saw that last week, a life of generosity. So let me just give a few action steps here of how we can degrade and destroy this greed. Understand it's a spiritual battle. We're coming up against the enemy of our soul, but there's some very practical things we can do. And the first couple are very easy, action-oriented. The first step is toss the catalogs. Those things that come in the mail, just toss them. Yeah, go ahead, take the coupon out, but just toss it. Just toss it. You know, I think that would be very helpful for some people. I'm not saying all. But for some people, that would be very helpful because inevitably in a crowd like this, there are those that go through that catalog and, oh, that's what I want. That I never thought about that, but that's what I want. Leads to greed. Here's a second one. Take a time out. Take a time out if a particular consumer item is not on your list. Now, what I'm referring to here is, dare I mention local merchants? Big box, let's just go big box stores, okay? Big box stores. You go over to the big box stores. And anytime we go over to those places, we're going to see something that, we didn't think of getting. And this is just saying, you know what, before you add something to your cart that you didn't go to the store for, take a time out. Go down another aisle first, and maybe even take a day before you go back and put that in your cart. I'm not saying we should never put those things in our cart, but a timeout would be helpful for us. Do I really need that? In fact, do I really want that? But we just have to get ourselves away from the attractive way in which that's presented, because marketing knows. It knows all about how we get discontent by what we don't have. And we will be outplayed by the marketers unless we just take a time out. Third, take a personal inventory. Take a personal inventory. And here's what this will help us understand. We've seen this morning that greed has many forms. So greed will be expressed differently in different people. Substantially differently. For some people among us here would crave more stuff. And so it's spend to get more stuff. Some are just, that's the battle, craving more stuff. For others, it's completely different. It's craving more savings. So it's don't spend, need to save this. And both of those, whether it's craving more stuff or craving more savings, can be an expression of greed, because both can potentially make us think that our security is in something other than God Himself. And our security is only in God. Both of those can make us resistant to sharing. If I crave more stuff, if I crave more savings, if that's out of order, I'm not going to be sharing. And both of those then lead to the absence of generosity. So take personal inventory. Now here's a very practical way then. Now you know whether you're craving more stuff or craving more savings. Just point out this greed is going to look different in different people. Now for all of us, here's a very practical means of one of the ways that we could take inventory, and that is to check ourselves whenever the word more comes to our minds or comes off our lips. The word more. Now, there's this psalm, Psalm 20, the 23rd Psalm. You know, we all find comfort in the 23rd Psalm. But let's laugh at ourselves a little bit here. Well, I don't know. It's kind of sad, so I don't know if we want to laugh at ourselves. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. Really? We sang this morning, more than enough. Well, let's take inventory and realize we wrestle with this need for more. We wrestle with this greed. Let's be honest about it. The Lord is my shepherd. I really don't need any more, but I'll admit I sometimes think I do. I sing Jesus is more than enough, but then during the week I talk about more square footage, more lattes, more video games, more getaways, more speed, more sound, more apps, more. And when you get into that crazy cycle of more, are we happy, excited, or tender? No, we're typically sad, angry, or scared. That's why Jesus said, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Finally, if we're really going to destroy this thing of greed, it will require start living generously. Start living generously. Our hands are in one of two positions in regard to generosity and greed. They're either closed in greed or they're open in generosity. It's one or the other. And here's the point. We cannot stop greed without starting to give. We cannot stop greed without starting to give. It's impossible for us to go out of here today and say, okay, I'm not going to be greedy anymore. Well, that was really convicting. I'm not going to be greedy anymore. But if we go out of here and we don't start giving, well, what's that all about? Our hands are still like this, either in possessiveness or covetousness. To end the greed, to destroy the greed, means to give, to live as Jesus lived. God so loved the world that he gave. And every step of Jesus' life led to a hill outside of Jerusalem where he gave his life. When God writes our life story, it's about giving. And when it's about giving, it's about freedom. Freedom from these things that really cause us self-inflicted sadness, anger, or fear. So this morning, will you stop the greed and move into generosity? Let's pray together. Just want to take a moment. Would you settle up with God right now? He's talked to you. Would you just respond to him? What's your intention now? What do you commit to? What do you commit to as we go from here? Same old? Perhaps you can just ask him by the Holy Spirit to guide you as you take inventory. I'm not sure where you land in this whole thing, but you're willing to take inventory. Let him guide you. Maybe there's a particular decision right now that needs to be made. Lord, thank you that you in no way were greedy towards us. Oh my. And when I look at you, Jesus, and then when I look at the enemy of our soul is all about greed. Oh God, may we just flee that form of idolatry and not be scared, but Lord, recognize the freedom that there is to follow you and to live graciously. Lord, some of our hands are spiritually arthritic in that closed position, but I thank you that by your power, you transform us. So Lord, I pray for the work in our hearts that would then open our clenched fists, that we would allow you to make that change in us for your glory. And thank you for the freedom that we find in that. I pray this in Jesus' name. Would you stand with me, please? God, who is rich, became poor so that we who are spiritually poor could become spiritually rich. God so loved the world that he gave. Jesus, as he walked this earth, his footsteps led to a hill outside Jerusalem where he gave. Would you go from here receiving the blessing that our God gave, and then extending that blessing in a gracious life lived out towards others? God bless you in that way.